What happens when one of country music's biggest stars walks onto a late-night talk show, expecting a friendly conversation, only to find herself trapped in an ambush interview that spirals completely out of control? Tonight, we're breaking down the explosive clash between Faith Hill and Jimmy Kimmel that ended with security getting involved and cameras cutting to commercial. This wasn't your typical celebrity spat. This was a full-blown confrontation that left the studio audience in stunned silence and producers scrambling. Before we get into exactly what was said that pushed things over the edge, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me which side you're on after you hear the whole story. The interview started normally enough. Faith Hill walked out to thunderous applause, looking elegant in a navy blazer and smiling warmly as she took her seat across from Jimmy. The band played her hit song as she waved the crowd. And for the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly pleasant. Jimmy opened with his usual style, making small talk about her recent tour and cracking a few harmless jokes about life on the road. Faith laughed along, sharing a funny anecdote about a hotel mix-up in Denver that had the audience chuckling. She seemed relaxed, leaning back in her chair, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. This was supposed to be a straightforward promotional appearance for her new album, the kind of interview she had done 1,000 times before on 100 different shows. But then Jimmy shifted gears. His tone changed, became more pointed. He leaned forward with that look he gets when he thinks he's about to land a big moment. And he said something that made Faith's smile falter. He brought up a charity event from 6 months earlier, one where Faith had been photographed leaving early. The implication in his voice was clear. He was suggesting she had snubbed the organizers, that she had treated the whole thing like it wasn't worth her time. Faith's posture stiffened immediately. You could see it in her eyes, the shift from friendly guest to someone who just realized they were being set up. She kept her composure, though, at least at first. She explained calmly that she had stayed at the event for over 3 hours, that she had a family emergency that required her leave, and that she had personally apologized to the organizers and made a significant donation to make up for having to cut her appearance short. Her voice was measured professional, but there was an edge creeping in. You could tell she was annoyed that this was even being brought up, and more than that, she was annoyed at the way it was being framed. Jimmy nodded along as she spoke, but his expression suggested he wasn't buying it. When she finished, he hit her with a follow-up that made the entire atmosphere in the studio change. He pulled out his phone, held it up, and said he had received messages from people at that event who told a very different story. He didn't say who these people were, didn't offer any proof, just dangled this vague accusation out there like it was established fact. Faith's face went from annoyed to genuinely angry. She asked him directly who he had spoken to, demanded to know who was making these claims. Jimmy deflected, said he couldn't reveal his sources, and tried to laugh it off like it was all just part of the interview process. But Faith wasn't laughing anymore. She told him flat out that what he was doing was irresponsible, that he was spreading rumors without any evidence, and that if he had real sources, he should name them or stop talking about it altogether. The audience, which had been laughing and applauding just minutes earlier, went quiet. You could feel the tension radiating from the stage. Jimmy tried to regain control, attempted to steer the conversation towards something lighter, but Faith cut him off. She wasn't done. She told him that this kind of gotcha journalism was exactly what was wrong with celebrity interviews these days. That hosts would rather create drama than have actual conversations. She said she had come on his show in good faith, literally used those words in good faith, and that she felt ambushed and disrespected. Her voice was getting louder, not shouting, but projecting in that way that made it clear she wanted everyone in that room to hear exactly what she was saying. Jimmy's demeanor shifted, too. The playful host routine dropped, and he got defensive. He told her that he was just asking questions, that it was his job to address things that were being talked about in the media. Faith fired back immediately, asking him what media he was referring to because she certainly hadn't seen any reputable outlets covering the supposed controversy. She accused him of manufacturing drama, where there was none, of taking something completely innocent and twisting it into something scandalous for the sake of ratings. The way she said ratings, you could hear the contempt dripping from the word. She told him that she had been nothing but gracious to him in his show, and that this was how he chose to repay that trust. Jimmy tried to interrupt her, tried to say something about how she was overreacting. And that's when things really escalated. Faith held up her hand, told him not to talk over her, and said that she was going to finish making her point whether he liked it or not. She said that for years she had watched his show and respected his work, but that this interview had completely changed her opinion of him. She called him out for what she saw as cheap tactics, said that ambushing guests with unverified gossip wasn't comedy or good interviewing. It was just mean-spirited. The audience was completely silent now. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked riveted. But nobody was laughing. Jimmy's face was red. You could see him struggling to maintain his composure, to figure out how to handle a situation that had clearly gone way off script. He told Faith that she was being unfair, that he hadn't ambushed her, that he had simply asked about something that people were curious about, but his voice lacked conviction. Faith shook her head, told him that hiding behind the excuse of public curiosity was cowardly, and that he knew exactly what he was doing when he brought up that charity event the way he did. She said that if he had genuine questions, he could have asked them with respect, but instead, he had chosen to frame it like an accusation to put her on the defensive from the start. The conversation had completely devolved at this point. What was supposed to be a light-hearted late-night interview had turned into a full-scale confrontation, and neither of them seemed willing to back down. Jimmy made one more attempt to lighten the mood, made some joke about how intense things had gotten, but Faith didn't crack a smile. She looked at him with this expression that was equal parts disappointment and anger, and she said something that would become the most quoted line from the entire disaster. She told him that she had expected better from someone who claimed to care about treating guests with dignity, and that clearly she had been mistaken about the kind of person he was. That was the moment when you could see Jimmy's patience completely run out. His jaw clenched, and when he responded, his voice had an edge that audiences weren't used to hearing from him. He told Faith that if she couldn't handle a few tough questions, maybe she shouldn't be doing interviews at all. He said that celebrities who only wanted softball questions and constant praise were part of the problem, that they lived in bubbles and couldn't deal with any pushback. Faith's eyes widened at that, and she leaned forward in her chair, getting ready to respond what was clearly going to be an even more intense rebuttal. But before she could get the words out, Jimmy kept going. He said that he had been nothing but professional, that his team had given her people a list of potential topics beforehand, and that if she had a problem with any of them, she should have said something before coming on the show. This claim seemed to catch Faith off guard. She shook her head emphatically, said that was absolutely not true, that no such list had been provided, and that his producers had specifically told her this would be a light-hearted interview focused on her music. Now, it wasn't just about the charity event anymore. It was about honesty, about who was telling the truth about what had been promised before the cameras started rolling. The studio audience didn't know where to look. Some people were still watching intently. Others were checking their phones, probably already tweeting about what they were witnessing. The band members looked uncomfortable. The camera operators kept filming, but you could sense their uncertainty about whether they should be capturing this. And through it all, Faith and Jimmy just kept going at each other, their voices getting sharper, their words getting more pointed. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was two people having a genuine heated conflict in front of millions of viewers, and neither one of them seemed to care about the cameras or the consequences. The question everyone in that studio was asking themselves was simple. How much worse could this possibly get? And that's when Faith did something that nobody saw coming. She stood up. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the stage floor, and stood up with a kind of deliberate movement that made it clear this wasn't just adjusting her position. This was a statement. The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath that rippled through the studio. Jimmy looked up at her, momentarily thrown off by this unexpected move, and for just a second, you could see uncertainty flash across his face. Faith stood there looking down at him, and when she spoke, her voice was controlled, but absolutely seething with barely contained fury. She told him that she was done, that she wasn't going to sit there and be disrespected on national television, and that this interview was over. She turned toward the audience, gave them a slight nod as if to acknowledge their presence in this uncomfortable moment, and started walking toward the edge of the stage. Jimmy recovered quickly from his surprise and called after her, told her she couldn't just leave in the middle of the show. His voice had a desperate edge to it now. The realization hitting him that this situation was spiraling into something that would be talked about for weeks, maybe months. Faith stopped walking, but didn't turn around immediately. When she did pivot to face him again, her expression was ice cold. She asked him what exactly he thought he could do to make her stay, whether he planned to physically restrain her, whether he thought she owed him something just because she had agreed to come on his show. She said that consent to an interview could be withdrawn at any time, and that she was withdrawing hers right now. The way she said it was so matter-of-fact, so final that it sent another wave of shocked murmurs through the audience. Jimmy stood up too now, walked around his desk in what looked like an attempt to close a physical distance between them to somehow salvage this disaster. He told her that walking off would make her look bad, that it would seem like she was running away from legitimate questions. It was a tactical mistake, and you could see Faith's entire demeanor shift the moment those words left his mouth. She walked back toward him, not all the way, but close enough that her voice could drop to a more conversational volume while still being picked up by the microphones. She told him that she didn't care how it looked, that her integrity mattered more to her than optics, and that frankly the only person who was going to look bad after this aired was him. She said that viewers would see exactly what happened here, that they would see a host who had promised one kind of interview and delivered something completely different, and that they would judge him accordingly. The energy in the room was absolutely electric at this point. This had gone so far beyond a normal interview disagreement that nobody quite knew what the protocol was. Should someone cut to commercial? Should security step in? Should the producers try to mediate? For a long moment, everyone just seemed frozen, watching these two people face off in what had become less an interview and more of a public confrontation. Jimmy's producer was visible at the edge of the stage, making uncertain gestures, clearly trying to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. But neither Faith nor Jimmy seemed to notice or care about anyone else in the room. They were locked in now, both too invested in making their point to back down. Jimmy made another attempt at defense, told Faith that she was being unfair to him and his staff, that they had worked hard to put together what they thought would be a great segment. He said that sometimes interviews went in unexpected directions, and that was just part of the process, part of having real conversations rather than scripted exchanges. Faith laughed at that, but it wasn't a genuine laugh. It was one of those bitter, incredulous sounds that people make when they can't believe what they're hearing. She told him that there was a difference between an interview going in an unexpected direction organically and a host deliberately steering it toward confrontation. She said that he had made a choice to bring up that charity event in the specific way he had with the specific insinuations he had included, and that he couldn't pretend that was accidental or spontaneous. She went further, told him that the real issue wasn't even about the questions themselves. It was about the dishonesty. She circled back to his claim that her team had been given a topic list, repeated that this was false, and demanded that he either produce this alleged list right now or admit that he had lied. Jimmy's face flushed deeper red. He sputtered slightly, said something about how his producers handled that correspondence, and he couldn't be expected to have every email memorized. Faith pounced on that immediately, told him that was a convenient excuse, that he was hiding behind his staff rather than taking responsibility for what happened on his own show. She asked him how he could claim to be asking legitimate questions when the entire setup for those questions was based on a false premise. The audience was completely transfixed now. Some people had their phones out, obviously recording, despite the studio's policies about that kind of thing. Nobody was trying to stop them, though the usual staff members who enforced those rules seemed just as mesmerized by what was unfolding as everyone else. This was the kind of moment that people would be talking about for years. The kind of clash that would be replayed and analyzed endlessly on social media and entertainment news shows. And it was still happening, still escalating with no clear end in sight. Jimmy tried once more to assert some control over the situation, told Faith that if she wanted to leave, she should leave, but that he thought she was making a mistake. His tone suggested he was trying to call what he thought was a bluff, banking on the idea that she wouldn't actually walk out and create that kind of scene. But Faith didn't hesitate. She said fine, told him she hoped he was happy with himself, and turned once again to leave the stage. This time she made it several steps further, actually reaching the point where the stage met the wings, where the cameras would typically stop following a departing guest. The audience was completely silent, except for a few scattered uncomfortable coughs and the rustling of people shifting in their seats. Jimmy stood there watching her go, his expression caught somewhere between defiant and panicked. You could almost see the internal calculation happening, the weighing of whether letting her leave made him look strong and unbothered, or whether it made him look like he had driven away a major guest through his own behavior. The producer was now frantically gesturing at him, presumably telling him through his earpiece what to do. But whatever instructions he was getting, he wasn't following them. Then Jimmy did something that changed the entire dynamic again. He called out to the audience, addressed them directly, made some comment about how this was certainly the most exciting thing that had happened on the show in a while. He was trying to play it off as entertainment, trying to frame this disaster as somehow intentional or at least mutually engaging. A few people in the audience laughed nervously, unsure whether they were supposed to find this funny or not. But most people stayed quiet, sensing that laughing at this moment would somehow be choosing a side, would be endorsing his behavior. Faith heard his comment, stopped in her tracks once more, and you could see her shoulders tense up. She turned around slowly, and the look on her face was absolutely thunderous. She walked back onto the stage with purpose, and everyone knew that whatever came next was going to be intense. She addressed the audience herself, then spoke directly to them, told them that what they had just witnessed was a perfect example of how some people in entertainment try to turn genuine conflict into a joke, try to deflect from their own accountability by treating everything as a punchline. She said that this wasn't funny, that this wasn't entertainment, that this was a person being disrespected and then mocked for standing up for herself. Her voice was shaking slightly, not from fear or uncertainty, but from the intensity of the emotion she was channeling into her words. She told the audience that they deserved better than hosts who treated their guests like props in manufactured drama, and that she hoped they would think about what they had seen here and decide for themselves what kind of behavior they wanted to support. Jimmy tried to interrupt her, told her she was being dramatic, that she was making this into something bigger than it was. That was clearly the wrong thing to say. Faith whirled on him, asked him how dare he diminish her feelings about being ambushed on his show. How dare he tell her that her response to being disrespected was excessive. She told him that this was exactly the kind of gaslighting behavior that people in positions of power use to make others doubt their own perceptions and reactions. She said that she knew what she had experienced, that the audience had witnessed it themselves, and that no amount of him trying to reframe it was going to change the reality of what had happened here. Her words were coming faster now, her anger fully unleashed, and there was something almost mesmerizing about watching someone speak their truth so completely and unapologetically. Jimmy's defensive posture hardened. He told her that she was grandstanding, that she was using his platform to make herself look like a victim when really she had just been asked some questions she didn't want to answer. He said that if she couldn't handle the most basic scrutiny, then maybe she wasn't as tough as her public image suggested. The insult hung in the air for a moment, and you could feel the audience react to it, a collective sense that it had gone too far, that this had crossed from professional conflict into personal attack. Faith's expression didn't change, though. She just looked at him with something like pity mixed with contempt, and when she responded, her voice was eerily calm. She told him that attacking her character wouldn't make his behavior any less indefensible, that trying to make this about her supposed inability to handle criticism was a transparent attempt to avoid accountability for his own choices. She told him that she had handled plenty of scrutiny in her career, that she had been asked tough questions by actual journalists who knew how to challenge someone while still maintaining basic respect. She said that what he had done wasn't tough questioning. It was lazy ambush tactics designed to create a viral moment at her expense. She accused him of caring more about clicks and views than about having meaningful conversations with interesting people, and she said that it was insulting to both her and to his audience. She pointed out that his viewers tuned in expecting entertainment, and maybe some insight not to watch someone get attacked based on unverified gossip. Her words were surgical, precise, hitting all the points that would resonate with anyone watching this unfold. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was dismantling his entire approach to hosting. Jimmy looked like he wanted to respond, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to formulate something that would counter her arguments. But before he could get any words out, Faith kept going. She brought up other interviews she had seen on his show, Instances where guests had looked uncomfortable or had been put on the spot in ways that seemed designed to embarrass rather than engage. She said that she had noticed a pattern, that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger approach that prioritized sensationalism over substance. She asked him when exactly he had decided that this was what his show would be, when he had chosen ratings over respect. The way she said it wasn't really a question. It was an indictment, a public cataloging of what she saw as a professional failings. And she was doing it on his own show in front of his own audience, using his own platform to call him out. The tension had reached a level that felt almost unbearable. Someone in the production booth must have made a decision, because suddenly there was movement at the edges of the stage. Security personnel appeared, not rushing in aggressively, but positioning themselves in a way that suggested they were ready to intervene if necessary. Faith noticed them, glanced in their direction, and something in her expression suggested she had been expecting this. She looked back at Jimmy and asked him if he had really called security on her, if he was really going to have her removed from his show because she had dared to stand up to him. Her voice was full of disbelief, but also a kind of vindication, as if this confirmed everything she had been saying about his character. Jimmy didn't respond immediately, looked toward his producer as if seeking guidance, and that moment of hesitation told everyone everything they needed to know about who had made the call to bring security in. Faith shook her head slowly, told him that this was unbelievable, that he was actually going to have her escorted out rather than simply acknowledging that this interview had been a disaster and taking any responsibility for his role in that. She told the audience that they should remember this moment, that they should think about what it meant when someone in power responded to criticism by trying to have the critic silenced or removed. She was framing this in real time, controlling the narrative even as security moved closer. And you could tell that Jimmy knew he had lost control of the situation entirely. Whatever he had hoped to accomplish with this interview, whatever viral moment or ratings boost he had been aiming for, it had backfired spectacularly. And now, he was the one who looked bad, really bad, in front of everyone. Faith took one last look at him, started to turn away, and that's when Jimmy made his final desperate move. He grabbed her arm, not aggressively, not violently, but he reached out and took hold of her arm as she was turning away, tried to stop her from leaving, trying to force some kind of final interaction. The audience gasped again, louder this time, and Faith immediately yanked her arm back, stepping away from him with a look of absolute shock and fury. She demanded to know what he thought he was doing, told him never to put his hands on her, her voice rising in a way it hadn't before. This was a different level of anger, a visceral reaction to a physical boundary being crossed. Jimmy immediately held his hands up in a defensive gesture, started stammering out that he was just trying to get her to wait, that he hadn't meant anything by it, but the damage was done. Everyone in that studio had seen him grab her arm, and there was no way to spin that into something innocent or casual. Faith took another step back, putting more distance between them, and when she spoke, her voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. She told him that touching someone who was trying to leave, trying to physically prevent them from walking away, was completely unacceptable. She said that no matter how frustrated he was with how this interview had gone, he had absolutely no right to lay hands on her. She demanded an apology right there, right then, in front of everyone. Her demand hung in the air, and for a moment, Jimmy just stood there, his face cycling through emotions, shock at what he had done, embarrassment at being called out, defensiveness at the implication that he had done something seriously wrong. The security personnel who had been hovering at the edges of the stage moved in closer now, clearly uncertain about whether they were supposed to be protecting Faith from Jimmy or escorting her off the premises or just standing by in, case things escalated further. Jimmy finally spoke, said that he was sorry, that he hadn't meant to grab her, that he had just reacted without thinking. But his apologies sounded hollow, defensive, more like he was apologizing for being caught than for actually doing something wrong. Faith clearly heard it the same way, because she shook her head, told him that his apology was as insincere as everything else he had said during this disaster of an interview. She said that a real apology would involve acknowledging why what he did was wrong, not just expressing regret that it happened. She told him that the fact that his first instinct when someone tried to leave a situation he had created was to physically stop them said everything. Anyone needed to know about how he viewed his guests and his own authority. Her words were cutting, precise, designed to make sure he understood exactly how serious his mistake had been. The audience was completely silent now, except for some scattered whispers, people leaning toward each other to process what they were witnessing. This had gone so far beyond anything anyone could have anticipated when Faith Hill walked out onto that stage less than 20 minutes earlier. What was supposed to be a friendly chat about music and touring had devolved into accusations of dishonesty, personal attacks, and now a physical confrontation that had everyone in the room on edge. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of this disaster. And you had to wonder what the producers were thinking, whether they were hoping this could somehow be salvaged, or whether they had already accepted that this episode was going to be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Jimmy tried once more to apologize, this time with more apparent sincerity, saying that he genuinely hadn't meant to grab her and that he understood why she was upset, but Faith wasn't having it. She told him that understanding why someone was upset wasn't the same as taking responsibility for making them upset in the first place. She said that every single thing he had done from the moment she sat down, from the ambush questions to the gaslighting to the physical contact, showed a pattern of behavior that was fundamentally disrespectful. She asked him if he treated all his guests this way, or she had been specially selected for this treatment. The implication was clear, and Jimmy's face showed that he understood what she was suggesting, that there might be some sexist component to how he had approached this interview. He tried to deny it, said that gender had nothing to do with anything, that he would have asked the same questions of anyone. Faith laughed bitterly at that, told him that she seriously doubted he would grab a male guest's arm when they tried to leave, seriously doubted he would have accused a man of being too sensitive or unable to handle tough questions. She was absolutely right, and everyone watching knew it. There was something about the way he had treated her throughout this entire exchange that felt gendered, that seemed to reflect certain assumptions about how a woman, especially a woman in country music who was known for being gracious and professional, would react to being challenged. He had expected her to absorb the ambush, to maybe push back a little, but ultimately to stay in her seat and finish the interview like a good guest. He had fundamentally miscalculated who he was dealing with, and now he was paying the price for that miscalculation in the most public way possible. Faith told him that she hoped he would take this experience and learn from it, that he would think about how he approached interviews and how he treated people who came on his show in good faith, expecting respect. But her tone suggested she didn't actually believe he would learn anything, that this was more for the benefit of the audience than for him. The security personnel were clearly waiting for some signal about what to do. Should they escort Faith out? Should they ask Jimmy to leave the stage? Should they just stand there and make sure nothing physical happened? The uncertainty in their body language was obvious and added another layer of surreal tension to an already bizarre situation. Faith looked at them, told them they didn't need to worry, that she was leaving voluntarily, and had been trying to leave for several minutes now before their boss had decided to physically restrain her. The way she said boss, with that slight emphasis, made it clear she was deliberately framing this as a power dynamic issue, as someone in authority trying to prevent someone else from exercising their right to leave an uncomfortable situation. She turned back to Jimmy one final time and told him that she had come on his show as a sign of respect, as a professional courtesy, and that he had repaid that courtesy with dishonesty, disrespect, and ultimately with physical contact she hadn't consented to. She told him that she would be speaking with her lawyers about this incident, that putting hands on someone who was trying to leave could potentially constitute assault or false imprisonment, depending on how it was interpreted, and that at minimum it was a serious violation of professional boundaries. Jimmy's eyes widened at the mention of lawyers, and he immediately tried to backtrack, said that she was blowing things out of proportion, that it had been a momentary touch, barely even a real grab. Faith cut him off sharply, told him that he didn't get to decide how she interpreted someone putting their hands on her without her permission. She said that minimizing her reaction was just another form of the same disrespect he had been showing her throughout this entire exchange. She told him that she was done talking to him, that anything further would be handled through proper channels, and that she sincerely hoped he would reflect on his behavior and make better choices in the future. Though again, her tone suggested deep skepticism about that possibility. She addressed the audience one last time, thanked them for sitting through what she acknowledged was an extremely uncomfortable situation. She told them that she was sorry they had had to witness this, but that she hoped it had been educational in some way, that perhaps seeing someone stand up for themselves in real time would encourage others to do the same when they found themselves in disrespectful situations. She said that nobody deserved to be treated the way she had been treated during this interview, and that she hoped the viewers at home would think critically about the kind of entertainment they chose to support going forward. Her words were carefully chosen, turning this disaster into a teachable moment, using the platform she had been given, even as it had been used against her to make a broader point about respect and boundaries and the importance of holding people in power accountable for their behavior. Then she turned and walked off the stage. And this time, nobody tried to stop her. Jimmy stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the wings, and you could see him struggle with what to do next. The show still had time to fill. There were commercial breaks to consider. There was the rest of the episode to get through somehow. He turned to the audience with a weak smile, tried to make some joke about things getting intense, but nobody laughed. The silence was deafening. He looked toward his band, toward his sidekick, toward anyone who might help him recover from this, but everyone just looked stunned. Finally, he addressed the camera directly, said something vague about how sometimes conversations take unexpected turns, how live television can be unpredictable. He was trying so hard to sound casual, to frame this as just an interesting moment rather than the complete disaster it actually was. But his voice betrayed him. You could hear the stress, the awareness that this had gone terribly wrong, and that there was no fixing it. The producer must have given him the signal to cut the commercial because he suddenly wrapped up with an awkward transition, telling viewers they would be right back as the cameras cut away. You could see his shoulders slump, the facade dropping immediately now that he thought he was off camera. But one camera kept rolling for just a few seconds longer, kept capturing his face as the reality of what had just happened seemed to fully hit him. He had pushed the guest too far, had been publicly called out for his behavior, had made physical contact that could be interpreted as aggressive, and all of it had been captured on camera for millions of people to see and judge. This wasn't a viral moment he could celebrate. This was a career-defining disaster that would follow him for years. The audience sat in uncomfortable silence as production assistants skewed around trying to figure out how to proceed with the rest of the show. What made the situation even more complex was the question of what would actually air. Would the network show this in its entirety, letting viewers see every moment of the confrontation? Would they edit it down, try to minimize the damage? Would they pull the episode entirely? Those decisions were being made in real time by executives who were probably watching monitors in panic, trying to figure out how to handle something that had never happened before on their watch. But even if they chose not to air it, everyone in that studio audience had witnessed it, had probably recorded parts of it on their phones despite the rules against that. This was going to get out no matter what the network decided. And when it did, the conversation around it would be massive. People would take sides, would debate who was in the wrong, would analyze every word and gesture. But for anyone who had actually seen the whole thing unfold, there was really only one conclusion to draw about who had been in the wrong here. The show did eventually continue after commercial break, but Jimmy was noticeably rattled for the rest of the episode. His jokes fell flat. His interviews with the remaining guests were stilted and awkward, and you could tell his mind was elsewhere, probably already spinning through worst-case scenarios and damage control strategies. The audience never fully recovered their energy either, the atmosphere in the studio remaining tense and weird for the duration of the taping. When the show finally ended, when the camera stopped rolling and the audience was dismissed, people filed out quietly, many of them immediately pulling out their phones to text friends or post on social media about what they had just witnessed. Within hours, clips started appearing online. Shaky phone footage from audience members showing bits and pieces of the confrontation. By the next morning, it was a top trending topic on every social media platform, with everyone from fellow celebrities to media critics to random viewers weighing in on what had happened and what it meant. Faith Hill, for her part, released a statement through her publicist addressing the incident. She confirmed that the interview had not gone as expected, that she had felt ambushed and disrespected, and that she had made the decision to remove herself from a situation that had become untenable. She acknowledged that things had gotten heated, but she stood by everything she had said during the confrontation. She made specific mention of Jimmy grabbing her arm as she was trying to leave, framing it as an example of why women in entertainment often felt they couldn't speak up when they were mistreated, because any attempt to leave or push back would be met with physical or professional consequences. Her statement was measured but firm, leaving no doubt about where she stood on what had happened. She thanked her fans for their support and said she looked forward to continuing to make music and perform for people who appreciated her work, making it clear that this incident wasn't going to silence her or slow her down. The fallout from this confrontation was significant and immediate. Sponsors started questioning their association with the show. Other celebrities began declining interview requests, and media critics published think pieces about the incident and what it revealed about late-night television culture. Some people defended Jimmy argued that Faith had overreacted, that this was all part of the give and take of celebrity interviews. But the majority of responses seemed to side with Faith, recognizing that what had happened went beyond normal interview tension into something more problematic. The image of him grabbing her arm became particularly iconic, a single moment that encapsulated larger issues about power dynamics, consent, and respect in professional settings. For weeks afterward, every conversation about the incident came back to that moment, to the physical manifestation of someone trying to control a situation and a person who was attempting to remove themselves from it. What happened between Faith Hill and Jimmy Kimmel on that stage became more than just a viral moment or an entertainment industry scandal. It became a cultural touchstone, a reference point for discussions about how we treat each other in professional settings, about the importance of consent and boundaries, about the ways that power can be abused even in supposedly friendly contexts. The fact that it all happened on live television, captured from multiple angles, witnessed by hundreds of people in person, and eventually millions more who saw the footage, gave it a weight and reality that made it impossible to dismiss or minimize. This wasn't, he said, she said, situation where people had to guess at what really happened. Everyone could see it, could judge for themselves who had behaved appropriately and who hadn't. And in the end, that clarity was perhaps the most important thing to come out of the entire disaster. Sometimes the cameras capture exactly what needs to be seen. And sometimes what they capture changes a conversation in ways nobody could have predicted. If you've made it this far, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because we're going to keep bringing you the most talked about moments in entertainment. And drop a comment below telling us, do you think Faith Hill handled the situation the right way, or should she have approached it differently? Let us know what you think.